Just a bit announcement before I will start this. I will ask Mr. Rafiq to start this session. The delegates who have not registered right now could go to the registration counter and register themselves there. I think no. The people who have come maybe have come today only. So because to earn CPE hours, like you have to register at the registration counter, right? So in continuation with the yesterday's session. On topic understanding the new processes assessment program in COBIT5. Now would like to welcome Mr. Rafiq to enlighten us on the topic. Right.
Okay, we are listening this. Good morning. Okay, before we get started, I thought we should have a look at one video which will put the context, things in context. Let's see this.
Hello, it says here you sell double glazing. Do you have a piece in stock? Let's say 4x8 meters? Only in frosted glass, yeah. They only have it in frosted glass! Ah, you install straight away. Oh, brilliant. How much is it then? Including putty? Not, okay. No problem, I'll keep looking. Thanks, ta-ra.
We are talking about governance. And you talk about process assessment model in the context of COBIT. And COBIT is supposed to be the model of IT governance. Now it's supposed to be the model of for governance of enterprise IT. In that context, what do you think is the message of this video? Sorry? Okay. What else? Anything? The process is not well defined. Okay. What else? Service level agreements. Okay. Organizations need to know where they have to go. Okay. Anything else? If you are asked to implement governance in this particular enterprise, where would you start first? What do you think is the issues here? The way the work was done, which means the process is not clearly defined, or probably that the staff are not properly trained. Okay. What else? Discipline. Okay. Discipline is another thing which could be there. Okay. What else? The tools were supposed to be used. Okay. So, yeah, that's wrong. Probably there is a risk. Okay. Yeah. Anything else? How many of you have come today only, which means you're not here yesterday? Only you. Okay. Yesterday, if you remember, when we talked about COBIT, I said there are three key things you need to remember as far as understanding COBIT is concerned. First, you need to understand the architecture. You need to look at COBIT from the perspective of an architect. There are two different perspectives. One is the architect perspective. Second is the engineering perspective. So in the engineering perspective, you're looking at the details. In the architect perspective, you're looking at overall at the macro structure. So if you have to understand COBIT, if you have to implement COBIT, the first thing you need to do is understand the architecture. Because if you understand the architecture, understanding the details of COBIT becomes much more easier, much more simpler. But if you have not understood the architecture of COBIT and you start getting into the details, you may understand COBIT, but it would be in bits and pieces, and you'll find it looks a little complex, looks very generic. You're not able to relate to your environment. So it's very important you get a clear idea of what is the architecture of COBIT. That's one thing. The second thing, which is the building blocks. If you look at any structure, any big structure, massive structure which is built, so first is there is an architecture, and there are key building blocks. Now, once you have got, these are the two main ingredients for the building to stand. Once that is done, then you add the contents, the building material for this. So if you look at COBIT, the beauty of COBIT is it provides you the documents which are provided in COBIT. They provide you the architecture for information management as far as the information technology deployment is concerned. And the key distinction between 4.1 to 5 is that COBIT5 has extended information technology processes to cover the business also end to end. So it is not, COBIT5 is not focused only on the IT process, but is focused on the business process also. So you can take any process and then implement it for business process also. In fact, quite a few, earlier, there used to be quite a few challenges when people used to say, okay, I am coming from an engineering background. I am supposed to install this particular, this one infrastructure. Now, am I supposed to know COBIT? Will COBIT be useful to me? Those type of questions would be there. Now, those type of questions would not be, may not be required to be asked now, because any process you take which is there in COBIT, you can apply it for any process, regardless of whether it's IT or non-IT. And that's a lot of time was spent in actually making it generic in nature. So you need to understand the architecture. Second, you need to understand the building blocks. Third, you need to understand the material. Okay. Yesterday we covered two significant parts. One is we looked at the 5 key principles of COBIT, and then we also said there are 7 enablers, key enablers. One of the key enablers is the process enabler, where ISACA has come out with a separate publication called COBIT Enabling Process. We also looked at how you can implement COBIT by using the COBIT implementation guide. We had a quick look at it. So today, what we would be doing is, we will have a quick recap of what we covered yesterday in terms of the process assessment model. Second, we look at what walkthrough of the process assessment, which we have already done yesterday. Then key things we are going to discuss today is how to implement COBIT, because this is important. Although this is not in the original schedule, but I incorporated it because I thought if you just navigate around COBIT, it's like flying in a helicopter around COBIT, you will not know what is the beauty of COBIT in terms of the details. And I have seen, even in a one-day workshop or two-day workshops, quite often the workshop is designed in such a way that it gives you a helicopter ride around COBIT. Okay, the participants don't get to know or use COBIT in detail to some extent. So what I would like to do is actually take you a walkthrough of the COBIT components so that it becomes easier for you to use. And then how to navigate and select contents. Once you understand the information architecture of COBIT, then it's important that you know what you want and select what you want for the purpose of use. In most of the COBIT implementations, as I said earlier, it is not necessary that you will use 100% of the components of COBIT. I generally compare COBIT5 contents with the 5-star buffet. So if you go to a buffet, it's not necessary that you should use, you can't even eat everything. So depending on your choice, you'll pick and choose what you want. Similarly, in a COBIT5 implementation also, depending on your need, you need to select what you want. No, what you select depends on the context, depends on the stakeholder needs, depends on the business needs, depends on the regulatory needs. Depending on the context, you pick up the specific information. So it's important you should know how to pick up the relevant content from COBIT5. So I'll also give you a quick walkthrough of how you can do this. Now to just have a quick walkthrough of what we discussed yesterday, there are 2 ways we can go through as far as the process assessment model is concerned. One, I can show you the presentation yesterday. Instead of that, what I thought is we'll have a quick test to check how much of this process assessment model, which we discussed yesterday, you understood. Okay. So what do you think is the process assessment model based on what we discussed yesterday? For doing process assessment, okay, what are the key things which are required? You need to define the scope in terms of where you want to implement. Okay, then yeah, outcome. So what do you want to achieve by implementing that particular process assessment? That should be clear. Okay, you also need to have work products in terms of what are the input, what is the output, what are the processes which are relevant. Okay. The most important thing, if you look at process assessment model, if you look at between COBIT 4.1 and COBIT 5, COBIT 4.1 was not designed for process assessment. It was designed from the point of the capability maturity model. So in the case of COBIT 4.1, the documents are available on ISACA's website. They have been rewritten for the purpose of process assessment. Whereas in the case of COBIT 5, I think most of the contents are in a readily usable form. So it's important to define what the objective of the assessment. Why should an organization go for a COBIT assessment? I said yesterday in the QA session that there could be 3 primary needs for any enterprise to go for a COBIT5 type of an assessment. One, there could be a regulatory requirement, or the regulators say that you need to have an assessment. Based on that, it could be there. Okay. Second, it could be because of the business needs. The management decides that we would like to have COBIT certification because it helps add value or it leverages or showcases our case. Third, it could also be based on the business needs in terms of the marketing needs, where they feel, okay, if you have to survive in the business, if you have to quote for a particular tender, then it's better that we have this particular type of assessment. That's why you find in Bangalore, we have the maximum number of CM level 5 companies. Because if you are 11 CM 5, then there are defense contracts in the US which can only CM level 5 companies can deliver. Now, if you have CM level 5 capability, it demonstrates that you can deliver on time. You can deliver products, software products on time. So most of the software companies, if you ask them, why did they go for any particular certification, most of them, they will say, they'll have a marketing need, that this is the business we are catering to, this is the area we are looking at. Okay, now let's get this time right. I think this session is supposed to be 10 to 11:10. The break, it's not 90 minutes. 11:10, and then we have break 11:10 to 11:30, and then we have the next session, which is 11:30 to 12:40. And then lunch is from 12:40 to 1:40, and then it continues like that till 5:30. So it's not like yesterday, the session is 90 minutes. The session is shorter, and it is going to be about 70 minutes. Okay, before we go further, any questions based on what we discussed yesterday? Right, let's have a quick look at how to implement COBIT5. This gives you the marketing talk. If you want to convince management, why do you need COBIT5? This is the only business framework for the governance and management of enterprise IT. This is not what ISACA is saying. This is what even the agencies like Gartner, Forrester, and various other agencies are saying. Now, this gives you some of the advertising slides of ISACA as to why you need to implement COBIT5. They said the globally accepted, it gives you the globally accepted expertise. You may not believe that to make out this publication of COBIT, just this business framework, with about 80 pages or so, the amount of time and effort which has gone into this, the amount of iteration which has gone into this, and the total amount of money which is spent on this COBIT publications as of now, I think is more than 1 million. And the beauty of COBIT is, if you start reading it, if you start understanding it, the more you will read it, the more you will understand it. In fact, yesterday, for the purpose of session, I was just going through one particular page. When I just looked at one particular page of the COBIT implementation, I found that just the 2 pages of there, which is there pertaining to risk assessment, I found it's a gold mine. If you're an expert, if you're a consultant, if you just use those 2 pages, you can do a risk assessment for any type of an enterprise. So quite often we tend to flip through the pages and think, okay, it's some general information. But if you have a particular need, and if you're looking for that particular need and you apply that particular information, you find it's valuable knowledge. And that's why it's important we need to know the distinction between data, information, and knowledge. So currently, if you don't have understanding of the information architecture, what is given in COBIT is nothing but data. Okay, there are 5 domains, there are 7 enablers, 5 principles, there are processes. Okay, all this is data. Now, if you can relate this data meaningfully, okay, then you'll find this is actually information. Okay, so principles, these principles are integrated in this particular way. You have this goals cascade. I can use this goals cascade in this particular way. So once you understand this, data becomes information. Now, this information by itself is useless. Now, once you apply this information in a practical situation, then it becomes knowledge. And once you're knowledgeable, that's where your expertise comes in. The more you start applying this knowledge, then it becomes a part of your internal understanding. That's what is wisdom. So as you go on reading and using COBIT, you'll find more and more you'll become wiser, because you'll get to know the depth of the knowledge which is there. Quite often, you just go through this and then you find, okay, there's a lot of data is there, a lot of information is there. But when you start looking into the depth, understanding the depth of what is information and how it is presented in a structured way, Just to build the structure, I think we spent more than 3 months in building the structure, in building the design of that particular information. So if you just understand this particular structure, then you'll know how beautifully it can be used for integrating any type of a framework. And that's what is very, very important. So if you don't understand this information architecture, all the building blocks, then you will not be able to really use the contents. That's why it's important to get a perspective of this. Now let's look at challenges. If you want to implement COBIT, if you look at many of the case studies of organizations who have used COBIT, you'll find most of them would be using in a limited way to the extent required. Okay, so which means out of the 37 processes which are there, you will select depending on need. Let's say you want to use COBIT for business continuity planning, or you want to use COBIT for implementing governance, or you want to implement COBIT for implementing or improving or doing a self-assessment of a data center. So depending on your need, you should know which processes to select. In addition to the processes, there are other 6 enablers also. You have to pick up information from the other 6 enablers. And that 6 enablers, as of now, they are not given in COBIT. They are given COBIT in bits and pieces. There is no specific publication as such. But there are other publications from which you can pick up this information. The key difference, especially in COBIT, is the enabling process, which actually gives you the content, which is most important, which is the knowledge repository, which was earlier there in the COBIT products, which has been brought together in this particular document. If you're going in for an ISO type of assessment, now ISO assessment gives you a processed way, a structured way of actually doing an assessment for checking what is the maturity level of a particular process which has been implemented. Yesterday, I also told you, governance is all about strategy and execution. So the business has got a particular strategy, and the need to get the strategy executed to deliver value to the enterprise. And that's what is most important. This particular strategy is set by the top management, and based on this particular strategy, the middle management, the operations, the senior management has to get the strategy executed. And the management has to, the senior management, the top management has to monitor whether the strategy is executed as per the needs of the business. So this is where we have this PDS cycle. And you also need to know the distinction between governance and management. Governance is all about planning out the strategy, chalking out the roadmap, and this is where the business is supposed to be headed. And management is about execution of that particular strategy. Quite often, before COBIT5 came in, you had a lot of vendors who were providing solutions. And what are solutions they were offering, they used to call it as a governance solution. The reason was because governance is a buzzword. Anything with governance can be sold. So you had a lot of vendors talking about governance and giving their own solutions. So it's important that you know what governance is all about. ISACA came out with a certification called CGATE, Certified in the Governance of Enterprise IT, as a member of that CGATE committee. And initially we had what's called as grandfathering. So anybody who had experience, let's say about 5 years, you can apply, give the details in 2 pages about what is your experience. And based on that, you can get certification. And when we got the certification, we had the opportunity to review this to a 2-page experience which people are writing. I found that people writing that I have got experience in firewall governance. I have experience in server governance. Okay, I have something called server governance, firewall governance. So it means what they use instead of management, they use the term governance. This is what I found many of the vendors also do. So there are a lot of this confusion about what governance and management is all about. Now in COBIT5, the distinction, the definitions are clearly given. So you should know very clearly what this distinction is. So if you look at in terms of the implementation of COBIT5, and the best thing would be to actually use this ISO 15504 approach for the purpose of implementing COBIT. Because then, although your aim may not be to go for certification, it's better to adopt this approach. Those of you who are familiar with COBIT 4.1 would have seen earlier there's something called the generic practices. And then there are specific practices. If you go back and then look at COBIT 4, the COBIT 4 was about 318 pages. In COBIT 4.1, it was brought down to, no, in 3, it was about 318 pages. In COBIT 4, it was actually brought down to about 206 pages. So it means nearly 1/3 was eliminated. Now, if you look at the reason how this elimination was done, the reason was most of the common practices which are there in all the embedded in all the processes were removed and they are put as generic practices. So there are 6 generic process controls which are given in COBIT 4, and that's how they're able to reduce it. So any process you have to implement, you implement the generic process controls and you implement the specific process controls. That's how it is done. So as looking at this question in terms of where these generic process controls are, in COBIT 5 you have seen there is nothing like generic process controls. And then I think 2 days back I got this distinction when I was walking through this information that these generic process controls are embedded in the ISO 15504 approach. So that's why if you want to make an effective implementation of COBIT5, it's also important that you use this approach of ISO 15504. So what is required in implementing COBIT is you need to work through the outcomes and the activities defined in COBIT5. So what are these outcomes and activities? We'll have a quick walkthrough again. And based on this, you need to identify ways to make them work as per the enterprise requirements. Now the key word here is identifying ways to make them work. Most of the cases, COBIT gives you what to do. Okay, to some extent only it will tell you how to do. Why is this link missing of how to do in COBIT5? Yeah, each enterprise is different, and depending on the business need, depending on the technology deployment, depending on the size of enterprise, how you deploy would be entirely different. So if you want to make a framework generic and abstract, it's important you need to take out the details. You may need to make it generic at a macro level. Then you can build in the how depending on the particular need. So if you're implementing COBIT5, it's important you pick up information in terms of what are the key things you need to work out, in terms of the outcomes, what you want to achieve. For achieving that, what are the things we need to do? How you do it, you need to work out the details. Okay. For a COBIT5 implementation, there is a specific guide called the COBIT5 Implementation Guide, which is also released at the same time. And this gives you the step-by-step approach of how you can implement COBIT5. We'll have a quick walkthrough of that. Yesterday I explained to you this one particular slide. It's important that you understand how to, if you are implementing COBIT, you need to be very clear about how to use this particular slide. So if you look at any framework for that matter, if you analyze not just COBIT, any framework implementation, you find the general approach would be same. Let's say you want to look for SOX implementation or ITIL implementation or ISO 27000. Any framework for that matter, the first thing is you should know what are the drivers. So what are the drivers? Why does the business want to do it? Okay, what are the pain points? What are the trigger issues? Is there a need for doing it? What are the benefits you're going to get? So that has to be clearly defined, because that will help you to provide the yardstick for the purpose of defining, okay, did we achieve that particular goal? Okay, so the first thing is to define what are the drivers. Second is where are we now? Okay, like yesterday I said, road doesn't go anywhere. You should know how to use the road. Similarly, they say knowing the destination is more than half the journey. If you don't know where you're going, no road can take you there. Another way I said, if you don't know the destination, any road can take you there. So it's important that you define very clearly where are we now, because we should know the starting point. Based on the starting point, you should also know where do you want to go. And once you have defined that, then you build the bridge, the roadmap in terms of what is the gap. For that, you need to have the process in place, and then you need to work out how to implement that. Once you implement it, you need to measure and monitor whether it's been done, and then ensure that it is implemented as a part of the organizational processes. That's what is called as institutionalize the process. COBIT5 gives you at 4 levels. First is at the generic level. Second is the program management. Any COBIT implementation, any key COBIT implementation would have to be taken as a project or a program. A program is a collection of projects depending on the business needs. So you initiate the program, you define the problems, the opportunities, define the roadmap, you plan the program, execute the plan, realize the benefits, and then review the effectiveness. This is what is done in project management. So the concept of project management is built in this particular cycle. Second, you also have this concept of what is called as change enablement. Any enterprise, if you want to bring in a change, you need to have a change enablement program. So if you're looking from the perspective of change management, this middle ring gives you this information. First is you need to establish the desire to change, and then based on that you need to work out the strategy. First build the implementation team, communicate the information outcome, what you want to achieve, identify the role players, operate and use the plans, and then ensure that the process are embedded, and then ensure its sustainability. It's not a one-time process. The worst thing which can happen for any best framework implementation is you take it as a one-time project. Okay, in that case what happens, it will be taken as a one-time project, and then documents will be generated, it will be filed, and after some period of time you go back to the same old process. So it's important that you have a sustainable process, which means it becomes a part of the internal organization process. And the last one gives you from the perspective continual improvement. Okay, so when you're implementing COBIT5, you need to ensure that all these key aspects are taken into consideration. Let's have a quick walkthrough of what are the drivers. What could be the drivers? Yesterday we discussed. The drivers could be need for new improved IT governance organization that could be realized by the pain points of the trigger events. So yesterday we went through some examples of what could be the pain points. For example, there is a major failure of IT, or the IT initiatives are not delivering, or the regulator has given certain remarks. Okay, or the business needs are not being achieved, the users are not happy, or the competition is way ahead as far using IT is concerned. Like that, you need to identify there are various pain points in that particular enterprise, or there's a trigger events. For example, there is a merger of this particular company with another enterprise, and they are using a different technology, they have different processes. So you need to identify what are the pain points or trigger events, and based on that, you can identify what you need to use. So it's important that the senior management, which is the board and the executive management, should analyze the pain points to identify the root cause. Why is this happening? Just because you have COBIT, it doesn't mean that you can use it as a one-all solution for everything, every problem. So you need to see and take a call whether COBIT could be useful in that particular situation. And based on that, you can also use it as an opportunity for meeting the challenges of the triggering events. So the goal in this particular phase, each of the phases, there is a particular outcome to be achieved. So the goals of this phase is outlining the business case, identification of stakeholders, the roles and responsibility, IT governance program wake-up call, and kickoff communications. One of the questions which was asked yesterday was, okay, who is responsible for implementing IT governance? Should it be IT, should it be the audit team, or should it be the management? Now it depends on the area where it is being implemented. For implementing COBIT5 project, what you need is a project manager. Okay, and that project manager may be from IT, maybe from business, or maybe from the audit community, whatever be the particular situation. Now it's important that project manager should have project management skills. So he should be able to manage, get the people with the requisite skills, and see that the COBIT5 implementation is rolled out. That's what is important. Next, where are we now? In this case, this is what we do. Define the problems and the opportunities. You form a powerful guiding team who has the knowledge of the business environment. One of the questions which is quite often asked is, if you have to go for COBIT implementation, should it be done internally or should it be done by an external team, with an external consulting team? So my general answer for that one is, you need to have a blend of both. Now it could be possible that the external SME, subject matter experts, may have knowledge of COBIT quite well, but they may not have understanding of the business. They may take time to understand the business process. Whereas the internal team will have excellent understanding of the business process, but they may not have understanding of the COBIT fully. So you need to have a blend of these two teams, which means you have the external experts who come in with their COBIT expertise, discuss with the functional experts within the organization, ensure that there is a powerful team, and then the clear roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. You also need to make an assessment of the current state. How do you assess the current state? So you can use different parameters. For example, you can use the IT goals in respect to the enterprise goals, use the goals cascade, look at what is it which is important. Based on that, what metrics do we have? Identify the most important process. Out of 37, these are the processes we have. Understand the management risk appetite. You may implement COBIT5 for similar type of organization, but depending on the risk appetite, the process you select, the activities you implement could be entirely different. Understanding the maturity of the existing organization, which means within the organization currently, what is the maturity level? Where do they stand? If the maturity of the organization is higher, what do you think would be the extent of COBIT implementation? Would be lower or higher? Yeah, would be lower. If the maturity of the organization is higher, for example, let's say if you take COBIT5, you want to implement in Infosys, the maturity of the organization, the processes, the documentation, the systems they have is much higher. So in that case, what you will pick from COBIT5 implementation could be much lower. Whereas you take up another organization which is the new one, which does not have too many processes in place, or it doesn't have structured system in place, the information you will pick from COBIT4 implementation should be much more higher. Next, you will define where do you want to be. This is most important, being clear about where do we want to be. Based on that, you need to communicate the desired vision to the team, to the management, get the buy-in from the stakeholders, and you also need to define the target state and perform gap analysis. Because this will define, okay, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and that becomes very important for going to the next step. And this is where we look at what needs to be done. Once you know what is the gap, you need to define what needs to be done. Depending on the organization, you may have to put in additional resources, you may have to do additional documentation. I'll give you some example of case studies as we go on. And then primarily what will happen is, you will have, based on this particular gap analysis, you will identify gaps in the processes, or you'll identify areas of improvement. And for that areas of gaps or areas of improvement, you'll pick up the knowledge or the information from COBIT, convert into knowledge and implement it. Integrate those into the business processes. How do we get there? We need to execute the plan. This becomes very, very important. Now, till the fourth phase, the consultants can definitely help. Okay? But how do we get there? There has to be a strong team internally who will take care of the execution. I've come across a lot of COBIT implementation projects which have been taken where the management has provided massive budgets. They've